El poder del perro radica precisamente en cada uno de los detalles de esta película y sobre eso hablamos con Grant Major, su diseñador de producción, que me contó cómo fue que pensaron con Jane Campion esta película que tiene nada más y nada menos que 12 nominaciones al Oscar, incluida una para el diseño de producción. Conversamos sobre cómo fue construir cada uno de los ambientes en los que transcurre esta película y cómo fue pensarlos precisamente para que le construyeran la identidad a los distintos personajes, especialmente a Phil y a Peter. Todo en este informe sobre el poder del perro.
We now return to Mira Akien and Contré with our latest interview.
I have to say that it's one of the best scripts I've ever read. The Power of the Dog. It was so powerful, and it reminded me in many ways of what my memories of the great Hollywood period of the 1960s and maybe early 70s, when I was a kid and going to the cinema and seeing these cowboy films and things like that.
25 years since our first run together, 1900 and nothing.
It had this sort of classic cowboy thing, but it wasn't at the same time. It was actually a very radical story about sexual politics in many ways, and this sort of masculinity, hyper masculinity, and alpha males and all that sort of stuff, but not in the sort of shoot 'em up, sort of things that traditionally happen in cowboy films. So I saw in it some great material for production design, and so I really, really wanted this.
It's a long time.
What you doing? Getting mixed up with her.
You are marvelous, Rose.
The movie is based on a book, and so you don't show us the whole story. It's like you picked this part of the story, and we start to see a movie when like the story is like already in movement, already in motion. So how did you create the world in order to like help the audience to understand this world, understand the characters and everything?
Good. Yeah. Yes, of course. So the story is based on the book. The book has got a way longer time span to it. I don't have any say in where the story starts and stops. That's as per the script. So Jane has chosen that moment to enter the story. And your audience who've seen the film will remember that the first 5 minutes of the film are to do with Phil reminiscing about, okay, what are we celebrating, George, his brother? What are we celebrating? What happened in 1900? So already we're looking back across their sort of family history at something that happened in around 1900. And again, fairly shortly after that, we learn that this fifth character, this sort of ghost of Bronco Henry, has had a big effect on the family and a big effect on the two brothers' lives. So it's a very potent sort of beginning to a story. And so, as a production designer, I'm also looking back. So how do I tell the story with architecture and objects and spaces that can help tell the sort of genesis of how we got to the beginning of our story? And I think that's creating those sort of perspectives and depth is really important to good design. We can't just sort of plonk a house on the a set, build a set, and just sort of give it no history. So I think making things real gives it nuance and gives it meaning.
I wonder what little lady made these.
Actually, I did, sir.
I want to ask you about like the identity of each of these two characters, one from Phil and the other one from Peter. Like they had their own like kind of workshop of their own. Peter with his taxidermy and Phil with his leather, how he worked the leather. So how did you like think of these workshops, and how did you develop these workshops for each of them?
Good. Yeah, that's a brilliant question, because they did both have this very similar sort of personality in many ways. They had their outside kind of persona, their facade, if you like. But they're both very, very articulate with their hands, and it's a side to them that brings them together in the end, you know. So Peter's one, you know, teaching himself to be a surgeon, or all that sort of what it means to be a surgeon. But you know, within that intellectual sort of pursuit is the violence of killing a rabbit with your bare hands, slicing it open and pulling out all the organs and drawing them all that sort of stuff. At the same time, you know, Phil, he's you know, he's very good with his hands, you know, in terms of being a blacksmith and woodworker and things like that. But he also does his own taxidermy. You know, he is responsible for the taxidermy in the house, in fact. So he's killed those animals himself. He's skinned them and stuffed them and mounted them up and put the glass eyes in and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, they're both very complex characters, and in the end, you know, even though they've got a very standoff and sort of combative kind of you know, way of dealing with each other to start off with, they actually come together very so intimately, and that's one of the ways that they have seen that in each other.
What kind of man would I be if I did not help my mother? I did not save her.
This is one of the things that everyone praises about the movie, is how every detail pays off at the end, because it's like the whole concept of the movie is in the details. So how was working with that in mind? For instance, like I can think of Anthrax, I can think of the cow dying there, and how feels is like trying to work with this leather. So how was thinking of all the details you have to have in mind in order to like help the movie?
Yeah, in some ways, you know, you've touched on a few points there, like some of them are dramatic points that we did talk about, like, you know, obviously we have to tick those things off because they are plot points that are very important to the story. But they also didn't want to be sort of hammered home too much because people will guess the ending, you know. So all these sort of subtle things did have to be recognised and included in what we did. But when it came to the practicalities of leatherworking and making all these animal parts and all that sort of stuff, you know, it's part of the course, as they say, for production design. You know, all these things are things that are little trades and crafts and things that I have to find the right people who can do these things, and I have to be able to learn about them myself so that I know that what's being delivered is the real thing. You know, probably one of the biggest themes through the story is the making of the lariat, this woven rope, which is so sort of synonymous with the weaving together of all these characters and the weaving together of the mystery, the tensioning of it, you know, with the tensioning of the dramatic situation that's going on, all these sort of metaphors. But at the end of the day, it was a lariat that's made out of cattle skins, I suppose, you know, which have a process, which we follow that process all the way through the manufacture of it, from, you know, the skinning the carcass of the bull of its you know, its skin, the scraping off of all the hair off it, and then cutting the strips once it's dried out on the outside. The skins cut into these strips, and then they're all woven together, and then of course the sort of the great sort of dramatic moment of introducing the anthrax pieces of this. So, you know, I had to learn about all that, and I had to, my prop makers also had to learn very much the materiality of that. Like we, you know, around the art department of where we worked, were all these skins where we're drying out. And, you know, so we had to sort of teach ourselves how to do it as well. And yeah, and having said that, there were expert people from Montana who were also adding in their sort of advice to us. So that was one of the many instances which had to be sort of resolved in a very practical manner.
Sort of a lonesome place out here, Pete, unless you get in the swing of things.
I have a question that I think it's a funny question. Is related to Benedict Cumberbatch and how he didn't wash. Is that true that he was like, in fact, I think Shane introduced him to the whole cast, I don't know if to the crew as well, as Phil and not as Benedict. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I think they call it method acting, don't they? Like he was in his role. He was in his role. In fact, in practice, I only had like a couple of conversations with Benedict over the whole course of the film. One before we started shooting, and one after wrap. all that time, he was quite standoffish with everybody, really, and didn't really communicate because he was in his role. He was focused on that role the whole time, and you know, I really respect him for that because he really went in deep. He went in deep to this character, and you know, given that the character for him would have been just words on a page and, you know, some direction from Jane and things like that, but he found this character which was the alpha male, sort of more of a male, more of a man than everybody else on the ranch, you know.